I'm Sherilyn Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for working women who are ready to shine. Each week, I bring you ideas, inspiration, and insight on balance, business, and getting it all done gracefully. You ready? Let's be brilliant. This is episode 251 of the Brilliant Balance podcast, and my guest today is Mary Hyatt. So I was first introduced to Mary a number of years ago by our mutual friend, Justin, and I was so delighted when we finally got to have an in-person conversation or a live conversation. I got to be a guest on her podcast a while back, and I am so happy to turn the tables this month and have the chance to interview her. Mary she's so great. I really think you're going to love her as a listener. She hosts the Living Fully Alive podcast. She actually runs a whole brand called Living Fully Alive, and she is going to be talking with us about emotions. Now, you all know how much I try to avoid these emotions, right? Feelings. As an Enneagram 3, they are not my favorite thing to talk about. So Mary is going to really dig into this subject and help us understand how feeling our emotions is really the only way that we can truly heal from the effects that they're having on us. And I think you'll find her to be a warm, bright guide for us on this topic. So I'm excited for you to meet her today. A little bit about Mary's backstory that I think is important. She really worked herself through severe trauma, really serious weight loss, and divorce all before she was 30. And she says, in her own words, she's received her PhD in the School of Hard Knocks. And from that, she birthed her Living Fully Alive brand, where she coaches women, often women entrepreneurs, and has built a really sizable business herself. So I definitely want you to check out the Living Fully Alive podcast, and we're going to link that up in the show notes for you. 8 years ago, Mary was in a really different place. She weighed 240 pounds. She had debilitating anxiety and depression. She was in a marriage that was not fulfilling, and she was using just about anything she could to cope, which was causing a lot of pain and a lot of fatigue. And in her words, she'd really completely lost herself. But there was this little voice inside of her that said, fight. And she took herself through self-discovery school and really changed her whole life. And the lessons that she learned in doing that for herself are some of the lessons that she is going to share with us today. So without further delay, please meet Mary Hyatt. All right. Well, Mary, welcome to the show.
So glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yay. So before we start, I would love it if you would tell us a little bit about what today has looked like for you so far, like what's been on your schedule and what's coming up after this.
Well, this is kind of the first official thing that I've had to do today, which has been great because I slept in a little bit. I just got back from a 2-week vacation to Peru. So I'm pretty much just doing laundry and cleaning up the house. And that's the extent of my day so far is housework.
Anything exciting after this?
Probably a nap, to be honest. I really feel, traveling just takes it out of you. It's like you got to get a vacation from your vacation. So yes. I'm going to do this, wash my face, and get back into bed.
It looked like a fabulous trip, though. You and I are connected on social channels, so I got to see some of the shots, and it just looked like a fabulous trip. And you were with some family.
Yeah. So Peru is like my second home. I take retreats there, often women who are looking for self-discovery experiences. And Peru is not only just beautiful geographically, it's just stunning, the mountainscapes and the ocean and the desert. It's very diverse, but the people are so precious and kind and grateful and so spiritual. And so this trip, I got to take my parents and my little sister. And so it was extra special. I hadn't been since before COVID. So it was like a homecoming, really. And just to bring my family made it really awesome.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Traveling with family is its own thing, right? Like it brings so many blessings, but it can also have its challenges. So I'm glad it was such a good experience.
Yeah. It can be multifaceted. Let's just put it that way. But it ended up really being great.
I love it. Okay, Mary. Well, we are here today to talk about feelings. And I want to get level set that as an Enneagram 3, this is not my most comfortable place, right? I find all kinds of ways to scoot right past my feelings and try to solve problems, right? That's more So what is a good framework for us to really think about like the full array of emotions that we might experience? Because I've heard you say there's a bigger range than we typically acknowledge.
Totally. Well, and I first want to just point out that you're not alone in that kind of avoidance of wanting to go into some of this murkier, nebulous kind of experiences and entering into the land of emotions. I think most of us feel a sense of trepidation, and that's really normal. I mean, we have not been taught what emotions are. We certainly don't have a very broad vocabulary for them. And we have this kind of fear around experiencing what I like to call the rainbow of emotions. And we tend to categorize them as good or bad, or scary or safe. And so, or positive and negative. And so for most of us, our way of experiencing and describing emotions is very small. So I think it is really normal to just kind of not want to go into that area, and B, it comes from a really well-earned place and that we haven't been taught about them. So what I like to think about the framework, I like to think about weather patterns. So when I think about the experience of being human, we experience this rainbow of emotions, and it shows up to us in the form of weather patterns. So like one day we might wake up and it might be a little cloudy, it might be a little rainy, it might be a little stormy. The next day, maybe we wake up, the clouds have passed, the sun is starting to begin to shine. We start experiencing some warmth, some joy, some happiness, some peace. And so just as our weather changes every single day, and oftentimes multiple times throughout a day, I mean, you could have a rainstorm in the afternoon, and by 6 o'clock, the sun's come out and everything's okay again. We as human beings also have that kind of internal weather system, that weather pattern system that happens inside of ourselves through our emotions. So when I like to think of a structure around it or some way of describing it, to me, that's helpful because it's kind of like, okay, we experience this. This is normal. This is what it's like to be a human, to experience a range of weather patterns, AKA emotions.
I love that. I love that because we don't question that when we look at the actual weather. Like I'm looking out the window, the sun is out, but 30 minutes ago it was pouring down rain. And so it really is like we're mercurial in the way that our emotions change, just like those weather patterns are. Fascinating.
Totally. And we don't put a moral judgment on the weather. Like we all know we need rain in order to sustain our planet. We all know that we need even seasons. Like we know we need winter, we need things to die in order for spring to come and things to come out and grow and to flourish. And then we have to harvest. So if we look at nature as a beautiful example and kind of the macro to the micro, we too have to go through that. We go through our own seasons internally. And if we can kind of remove some of that judgment and not go, oh, this is bad, or this is good, or this is positive, and this is negative, that contrast is actually really helpful. Like, how often do we feel such relief after deep periods of grief or sadness when we experience some peace, some stability, some safety, some relief? It's like, it's sweeter when that happiness comes. It's sweeter when we've been in a place of sadness or longing. There's something about that contrast that is necessary so that we can appreciate when those easier times come.
Right. Like you don't take it for granted. Whereas if you felt, and yet I think the cultural narrative is we should feel happy all the time. Like we're all seeking happiness and we should be happy. We deserve to be happy. And so if you're not happy, then somehow you're off center and there's something. And happy is such a sort of broad term. Like it isn't even particularly well defined. I think within happy, there's 1,000 shades of happy. Like you talked about the rainbow.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think it's dangerous when the pursuit is only happiness because it negates that human experience. And it really takes us away from being in life, participating in life. And as we know, I think if we have learned nothing else over the past few years, life can be really hard. There can be a lot of grief. There can be a lot of sadness. There can be a lot of loss. And if we don't feel like we have the skill set to be able to manage those more challenging and difficult emotions, we end up becoming divorced from life. It's like we don't have space to hold those challenging moments or challenging sensations that arise within our body. And so the only answer is to numb and to cope and to disassociate and to leave ourselves, to self-abandon. Like, I'm unwilling to feel what's happening inside of myself. And it becomes dangerous because then we leave ourselves. We break trust within ourselves. And to the extent that we say, I'm unwilling to feel that, is really that extent of self-abandonment. And so much of the work that I love doing with my clients is rebuilding that trust with yourself, like sitting with some of those challenging emotions and saying, I witnessed that in myself. I'm willing to sit with, be with, attend to, attune to whatever is bubbling up, whatever is asking for attention. So to me, that is such a pathway into deeper healing. And so when we only chase happiness, we miss out on a lot of the data and feedback and information that's present with some of these other emotions.
And that, like, bad things can happen. I mean, to say it really bluntly, like if we suppress or ignore those feelings, and there's all kinds of ways we try to skate past them, right? We numb them, we polish them up, we lie about them, we ignore them, like all the ways that we try to act like they're not happening can get us into some trouble. What are some of the things you've seen or experienced that can happen when we're sort of trying to disavow or disregard those feelings?
It's so multifaceted, but I think first and foremost, the women that I work with are high achievers. You know, they're people who are after really achieving some great, amazing, purposeful, beautiful things. I mean, they have such a mission in life. And so along with that, you know, when you're kind of climbing the ladder or you're creating something big or you're out there launching something important, there is a whole wave of emotions that you're going to go through in that, right? There's going to be some fear. There's going to be some nervousness, some doubt, some judgment, maybe some anger. I mean, all kinds of things, disappointment that come up alongside confidence and excitement and some of the more quote unquote positive emotions. But when we're unwilling to feel some of those more challenging emotions, then we're not really taking care of ourselves from a holistic place. So we end up pushing when our bodies, for example, are asking for rest. We are saying yes when internally our alarm bells are going off and saying, no, you have too much on your plate already. You know, you're people pleasing, you become codependent. And anytime we stuff our emotions and we bury our emotions and we say, I'm unwilling to feel that, or that is a bad emotion, that's not good for me to feel, then unfortunately, it doesn't just go away magically. What happens in the body is it becomes allostatic load and creates stress to the nervous system.
Okay, you're going to have to define that term for us, though.
I know. So basically, what happens is that your body has a capacity to hold a certain amount of stress within its body and still operate and function optimally. But when you keep stacking that stress, those stressful experiences, or when you're bearing emotions, what happens is think about it becoming an excessive load. So it's starting to tax the nervous system. So all of a sudden, it's draining your cortisol. It's draining your adrenals. Your body is going into that fight, flight kind of response. And it's in this hyperactive, overreactive state. So it's draining everything in your life force energy. So it's your emotions get out of whack, your hormones get out of whack, your neurotransmitters get out of whack. And all of a sudden we start seeing symptoms of burnout, and we start seeing symptoms of disease, or as I like to call it, dis-ease. And so you might be seeing autoimmune issues. You might be seeing issues related to your metabolism. Sleep gets disrupted. You maybe have a shorter fuse and your emotions are real quick to fire, and you're kind of, yelling at your kids or yelling at your husband or whatever. So that allostatic load, meaning kind of those deposits over time within the body that happen, that create this excessive load, that is wear and tear on the body. And so that can show up really sideways, whether it's in a physical manifestation like sickness or disease, or in an emotional place where we have excessive anxiety, excessive depression, suicidal thoughts, burnout, exhaustion, overwhelm to a big degree. So that's kind of the consequence when we aren't willing to handle things in the present moment. They start stacking up.
Yeah.
Stacking up.
You used the weather metaphor, but when you were just saying that, it was making me think about a volume knob and like the volume dial getting turned up until it was like this kind of deafening noise where like you can tolerate a little bit of it, but then the sort of louder and louder it gets, the more completely overwhelmed we are by the experience. So it's like the emotions are, or all those feelings are signals, right? They are, maybe it's fair to think about it that way. They're trying to tell us something about what's causing them or driving them. And then if we're ignoring them, we can't make those adjustments. So we just keep living under the same. Yeah.
Well, think about how much of your life is reactive to emotions that we're unaware of. So like if you're not present to what's happening, and oftentimes I talk to my clients and I say, most people are operating from the shoulders up. So we're like big bobbleheads, walking around, and we really value the mental body, the intellectual body. We're really attuned to our thoughts. We know what we're thinking. We know when we're feeling depressed. We know when we're feeling anxious or stressed. But oftentimes we are numb to or disassociated from our body, our energetic body, our emotional body, and our physical body, which to me is sort of below the shoulders. And there's so much wisdom and so much information, so much data, so much feedback that is happening moment by moment inside of our physical, our emotional, and our energetic bodies, kind of below the shoulders. That to me is superpower. Like when I think about operating in a business setting, if I'm running a business or I'm an entrepreneur, if I'm working with my clients, so much of what gives me edge is found below the shoulders. My mind is very subjective. It's full of stories and narratives and old beliefs and just generational thought patterns that have been passed down and cultural biases and all the different things. And so to me, the purest way to get information is connecting into the felt senses, into our body, into our emotions. And when we can access that, oh my gosh, all of a sudden we're able to process conversations that we're having with other people, our people that are reporting to us. It gives us like a sixth sense when we can tap into that, which is really powerful to me. Like I said, that is kind of that secret sauce that I think a lot of us haven't learned yet.
Yeah. Do you ever find yourself saying, I just need a minute to breathe? While the whole idea of meditation can sound totally intimidating, I've found that stepping away from the chaos of life, even just for a few minutes, is incredibly restorative. So if you're short on time, but could use a few moments of peace right about now, listen to my 5-minute meditation for working moms. It'll help you clear your head and come back to your day feeling centered and refreshed. Head over to brilliant-balance.com/breathe. Press play and settle in for a few mini moments of peace right now. How does that work? Because I'm fascinated by that. And I know people listening, it will be relatable. I think we attract an audience of women who are very much in their heads.
Totally.
And that's where a lot of our recognition and praise has come from, is through intellect and through sort of contributions that are, driven by our minds. And so I think a lot of us have tried to completely disavow our bodies for a long time.
Sure.
Tell me more about that, like the how.
So forever, especially as women, like our bodies have not been a safe place, right? Like we have been taught to quiet them, to shrink them, to be smaller. And especially just based on, for a lot of women, the trauma that we've experienced inside of our bodies for various different reasons, we escape the body. Like when you think about traumatic events, for example, the first thing that happens is you leave the body and you go into the mental. And that happens on a very small scale and can happen on a very big scale. So to me, part of the work that I do with my clients is more embodied work. And so what that means is we drop from the head into the body and we start to cultivate a relationship with the body. I like to think of the body as its own person, like with its own agenda, its own dialogue, its own wisdom. And so for me, it's learning to listen to those little whispers that you were talking about, like the signals earlier. Like we're all getting those messages day in and day out. So how can I learn to hear the whispers before they become a huge yell, a scream, a sound of alarm? And so for me, what that looks like is a daily practice of mindfulness, of dropping into the body and feeling, like, first and foremost, what are the felt senses? What can I smell? What can I see? What can I physically touch? How do my clothes feel on my body? What can I taste? Which other sense did I miss? What could I hear? And that kind of starts with, okay, I am a physical body and I have these 5 senses. And then there's a deeper, it's sort of like an external felt sense. Then there's an internal felt sense. And that is what I like to think of as like your inner knowing, that inner being, that sense of intuition and wisdom that we have access to. And sometimes that looks like, as an emotion, I'll feel it in my body before my mental brain takes over. So like, think about anxiety. Most people feel anxiety like in the pit of their stomachs, like nausea or a rumbling. Maybe they feel a sense of tingling underneath their skin. Maybe their armpits start to sweat. Maybe blood rushes to their head when they're feeling anxious. Now that's our body signaling, hey, I'm feeling anxious, before we have the thought, I'm anxious. So our body is communicating to us before our brain ever does, which I think is really brilliant. And so it's sort of a skill set that you can develop to become sensitive to your body. But to me, if I can pick up on that before I start interrupting that with my interpretation from my mind and putting all my biases on it, putting all my shoulds on it, putting all my codependency on it, or whatever it is, my need to perform, my need to achieve. If I can look at almost like the neutral message first and go, something's showing up here that's asking for attention. What does that part of myself need? What is it asking for? What is it longing for? How can I attune to and soothe and comfort that part of myself? Maybe that's fear. Maybe that's an old wound popping up. Maybe that's some self-doubt, some self-criticism. How can I attend to that first before I go into my analytical brain?
Yeah. So good. So good. And I'm thinking about, I've heard you talk about this before. So I'm going to ask the question based on that advantage, that we don't experience all of these emotions in a vacuum, right? Like I could sit here and think about, if I could sit all day and attend to my emotions, like, wouldn't that be great? Right.
Totally.
But we operate inside of family systems or work groups, so our emotions sort of swirl around inside of these relationships. Other people are having feelings. We're having feelings. Those feelings are interacting with one another. And if we're dealing with our emotions, let's just say differently than someone in that relationship, our partner, our children, our parents are dealing with theirs, like, how does that show up?
Yeah, it's complicated, right? It's like humans dealing with humans.
Yeah.
No, it is complicated. And I think first and foremost, part of this self-awareness journey of understanding our emotions first gives us space eventually, not quite at first, but eventually it gives us space to have empathy for the way other people process or don't process their emotions and hold space for that. So if I'm not dealing with my emotions, for example, I have no tolerance for somebody coming at me who's emotional or angry or frustrated with me. I'm just going to be instantly defensive. And I'm going to, go straight at him, and it's going to be some kind of a combat. So I think part of emotional awareness and emotional intelligence is it gives us this incredible gift to honor everyone's journey. So I know, for example, if I'm having one experience and I'm feeling really upset about, like, let's say something that my boyfriend said to me, and he comes at me and he's going, well, you said this and you said this, and it's really your fault. There's no way to have a conversation. We don't actually get anywhere. But when you deal with two emotionally intelligent people, all of a sudden you can hold space and go, wow, I really hear you. That makes a lot of sense why you could feel that way. Let me understand that better. And we can ask a question to deepen our understanding of somebody else's felt experience. and we don't take it personally. Like I think about myself all the time as I am my own person. How can I hold on to me even when somebody is having their own emotional experience that might even be directed at me?
Right.
But when I can hold on to my sense of self, all of a sudden I have agency, I have power, I have the ability to make rational choices and decisions versus being reactive. So I think that first and foremost, everybody's sort of entitled to process the way that they do, given the life experience and the knowledge that they have. And my work is to focus on me. My work is to handle what I'm feeling, the triggers that are popping up inside of me, to attend to that first. And then if I have capacity to hold space for somebody else.
Which takes a lot of emotional maturity. And, I think it's a great goal to be working toward. And I think when we get it right, we know what it feels like and it feels so good. And when we get it wrong, we know that too. We can tend to ourselves. And something we talk about a lot around here is really only take care of ourselves and tend to our own. We can't change or fix the way other people will handle situations as much as we might want to. But it does create an interesting challenge, right? Because sometimes we can feel like we don't have an outlet for our emotions. Like the people around us can't handle our emotions, right? So then I think that's another reason a lot of women in particular, and not just women, but I do think it veers toward women, like holding them in stuff. Like who can really handle this? I'm not allowed to be fill in the blank of whatever the emotion is. So where do we turn? Where do we take them sort of for processing if it's not the people closest to us?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge that that's heartbreaking.
Right.
Like I think part of the empathy that I have is it's really challenging when you don't feel like you have a safe space near you, like your spouse or your close friend, if there's judgment there. And that's real. I mean, that is very true for a lot of people. And I think that's why finding safe spaces is so, so important. And that can come through a lot of different avenues. And for me, I have a trusted few people, some that I pay, some that are dear friends that I go to that I know will be a beautiful sounding board for me, that will listen, that aren't going to rush in to try to fix, that won't necessarily sit there and judge me, but will really create that space. And that can be, for me, it's my therapist, it's my coach, it's one of my best friends. And I'm grateful that I have a partner who is also very emotionally intelligent. And so I can go to him. But I think that finding those sources, even when you have to pay for it, is so necessary, even if it's one person, even if it's somebody in your spiritual community, a mentor, a close relative, or a therapist or a coach or somebody like that. That's a game changer, having one person. And then if not, to me, we always have access to our higher power.
Yes.
Always, always, always. So I always say that we are in a divine partnership, whatever that means to you, whether that's the universe, God, source, Jesus, Buddha, Allah, whatever. We are in a divine partnership. And so we can't forget that the feeling of being alone is not necessarily totally accurate. We can feel alone, but the truth is we always are connected to something bigger than us. And we can go directly to that for connection and to be heard, for sure.
I think that is so important because there's a tether to that's permanent, it's eternal. Right. And that ability to just know that even if there is not another human that you can lay your hands on in that moment to let it out to you, like just going for a walk or sitting where you are and closing your eyes and sort of, and knowing that it's handleable, like whatever you're feeling is not bigger than whatever that is. I think that's a really important piece of perspective. And I think some of us have been through spiritual practices or sort of taught to leverage spiritual processes as ways to manage our emotions.
Right.
But there is this interesting term that I've heard you use called spiritual bypassing. And I have to say, it's what really caught my attention was, what is that? And how does that maybe get in the way of having an authentic experience with our emotions?
Oh yeah. I love this conversation. And this is a conversation that could go on and on for hours because it's nuanced, but I did not coin the term. So this is something that I learned through my own journey. And it started in the 1980s by a guy, psychologist named John Wellwood, and he was Buddhist. And so in the Buddhist tradition, a huge part of that faith is to kind of be separate from right? To learn kind of non-attachment. And so he was witnessing inside of his spiritual community this trend of spiritual bypassing, of leaving things that were challenging and hard about life and sort of going into a higher place, enlightenment, detachment, to escape whatever was uncomfortable, like real world issues that were challenging. Like, let me just meditate and kind of bypass, transcend them. And you find that in pretty much every faith tradition, this idea of, whether it's getting to heaven or 5D reality or enlightenment, there is this idea of, we don't like what's really happening right here in this plane on earth, and let's hurry up and get to the good stuff where there's no pain, there's no trouble, we're in this state of bliss. And the problem is it's a premature transcendence. And so it's like, we want to skip sort of the messy middle. I know you talked about that in your podcast.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we want to bypass the difficult sort of wrestling with, head in the ground, wailing, all the stuff that we think about that we want to avoid. We bypass that by using spiritual rationale.
Yeah. And it's so fascinating because we're having a human experience. So to expect ourselves to sort of transcend that and completely disavow the reality of those feelings doesn't feel like it allows us to have the human experience fully.
Yeah. And let's be honest, we don't want to have the experience
when it's yucky, right?
You know what I mean? Like I can fully admit that when I'm knee deep in my stuff, I don't enjoy it. Like, it's not like I'm like, yay, I get to go like deal with this thing again. But there is something about honoring our own journey that I think is such a gift to ourselves. Like, when we deny our stories, when we deny the journey that we're going through, again, it's this way that we self-abandon, where to me, being willing to witness my own journey and to say, yeah, you know what, Mary, that was really hard. Or Mary, that was really unfair. Or looking at the world and saying, this is not right. This is not right. There are things about that we need as human beings to develop character, to spur us into action. Like, I was just in Peru, and it's third world country, right? There's a ton of poverty. And I'm grateful to be part of a project where we get to help local schools with organic food for children that are very severely malnourished. And if I wasn't willing to be in that pain and to witness these children not being able to be well fed, to be having all kinds of diseases and all kinds of things, I wouldn't feel this urge to step in and to offer support. Right. And to look at how can we shift this system. So there's something incredibly powerful about being in the messy that calls us into powerful advocacy work and deep involvement with humanness that I think is vital for love to continue to spread in the world.
Yes. And I think, just to bring it full circle, if we don't drop into those feelings, as uncomfortable as they might be, with recognition that they are temporary,
totally,
right? Then we can't move through them. So your weather system analogy from the beginning, like you can ride out a rainstorm, I guess. I mean, technically you come inside and be like, I'm going to pretend it's not happening. But if you just stood in the rain for a while, it would still pass. It's not like you coming inside made it stop raining. I mean, it made it stop raining on you in that analogy, but the ability to just stand in the rain until it is past, and then the sun comes out and you're so grateful that it's out again, or if you're my daughter and you love the rain, you're waiting for that rainy day.
Right. Well, truly. And it's like, if you think about the cycle of like the stress cycle inside of the physical body, the nervous system, if you cut that off halfway through and you say, okay, I don't want to deal with this hard. If you think about it like an arc, you never get through to the other side where you experience that relief. And what happens is, if you cut it off in the middle, again, using that phrase, allostatic load, what happens is all that stress that you're unwilling to feel gets down into the body, gets put into the body, buried into the body, versus moving through it. You discharge that energy. You no longer house it inside of your body. You discharge it. You move it out and through the body. So part of the path to transcendence, if that's what we're really after, or enlightenment or happiness or joy, is that we have to discharge the energy of some of these heavier emotions, some of this overwhelm, the stress, the anxiety, the fear, If we don't move through it, it gets buried. If we move through it, it discharges and it's out, which is awesome.
Beautiful. Yeah. Beautiful. Just amazing, Mary. I love this topic. I really do. And I know I could learn for hours and hours from you. And I people can, because you did a whole series on this topic earlier this year on your show. So tell them a little bit about Living Fully Alive and the series you did on Feel to Heal.
Yeah. So I have a podcast that we just finished up the 3rd season. And for that, we just did 8 episodes called Feel to Heal. So we really dig into what emotions are, why we feel so strongly about avoiding them. Where did that come from? How can we move beyond that and to become a more emotionally intelligent human being? We get into spiritual bypassing. We get into all like the juicy stuff. I have several guests that are on the show, and I highly recommend going and checking out. It's the Living Fully Alive podcast. I'm about to launch season 4 here in a couple of weeks. So I'm excited about that, but definitely go listen to past episodes for sure.
So great. And a great chance to go kind of get a little bit deeper into this subject. And so we'll link that up in the show notes so people can find it. Or if you, wherever you're listening to this podcast, put in Living Fully Alive, you'll find your way over to Mary's show. Thank you so much for being with us today. I love these conversations. I love the depth that you bring. You have so much wisdom in this area because you've lived it. You've done the work and it shows. And I'm really grateful to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you for sticking with us to the end of this episode. I hope that you are taking away a gem or 2 or 10 from my conversation with Mary. She is just such a delight, and I am just so glad that she was willing to share her time with us for today's episode. I want to make sure you check out the links in the show notes so that you know how to connect with Mary's work online, especially that Feel to Heal series that you can find in the archives of her podcast. If you are new to the Brilliant Balance community and you need to find your way to us online, the best thing to do is go to brilliant-balance.com. That is our home base on the internet. You will find a link there where you can subscribe to the weekly. You'll get all the goodies that we put out into the world delivered straight to your digital doorstep every Tuesday morning, including the most recent episode of this podcast. So that's a great place to go get started, get connected with us. You can also come over to Facebook. There's a group called Brilliant Balance, and we will welcome you in. And additionally, you can follow along on Instagram, brilliant_balance, or me personally at C Skolnicki. Thanks for tuning in today, everyone. That is all I have for you. Till next time, let's be brilliant.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.